In this episode, we have on Dr. Tony Nader, who is a medical doctor that trained at Harvard University, went to MIT for neuroscience, and he is a globally recognized Vedic scholar as the successor for Transcendental Meditation. He is a true, really legend in this space and has been doing so much work in the space of consciousness for decades. And I'm excited for you to hear this conversation. Tune in to answer some of the most profound questions that most of us are asking in our day-to-day lives that we have never really had the answer to. Science and spirituality combined, this is the podcast to answer some of the questions that you've always had in your life. Before we hop into this episode, I have one favor to ask of you. If you've got any kind of information or inspiration from this podcast, it would mean the world to me if you hit the subscribe button. Just like most podcasts out there, there are more people that watch this show that are not subscribed than that are subscribed. And so if you want to help me get bigger and better guests for this show as we go along, and I hope you do stick along, it would mean the world to me to hit that subscribe button so that we can make it happen. Thank you. Let's get into the interview. What from your work do you feel is overlooked, isn't given enough attention to, but that you're really excited about?
Consciousness and its importance in changing one's life and the world.
So that can give us, there's 1,000 different pathways that can go down. And from your work, I find it fascinating that you take the mystical route, but you also take the scientific route. So for people that really aren't aware of what consciousness is to begin with, I think it's a great place to start of what is consciousness?
Consciousness is a field. People imagine consciousness is the product of our brain, our nervous system. They also imagine that consciousness is only a human quality, or some people in more recent times, they have said maybe animals have consciousness, maybe not all animals. And therefore, it's a definition that is very limited in what the reality of consciousness is. So what is consciousness on those levels is just being conscious, being aware. It's like when you are sleeping or when you are in anesthesia or in coma, you're not aware of anything. So we say you are not conscious. And therefore, the result of that is that there is no consciousness in that case. I take a completely different perspective. And that is that consciousness is a field which is independent of the observer that observes that field. So there is an ocean of consciousness, a field of being, which is non-material, non-physical, that itself then is observed from different perspectives, depending on how broad the capacity of the observer is. Which means humans, let's say, have a very wide ability to look at that field, and they can look at it from different perspectives. And animals also, they do, but also trees and plants and even minerals and objects, they have what we can say a very minimal level of ability to experience, but that experience is still there. And, you know, when two objects interact with each other through gravity or through electromagnetism, they are reacting to each other, like attracting each other, if it's a positive charge with a negative charge, or if it's a mass that is attracted by another mass through gravity. This I'm calling also part of, not the whole consciousness, of course, part of the minimal level of what consciousness can be, all the way extending through more complex, more orderly organisms, plants, animals, and then humans that now have the ability to experience a broader perspective of consciousness. So if we limit consciousness to only human-like consciousness, we are missing the point.
Consciousness is a topic that I think for so many people, it's so hard to conceive. And it seems in the science, it was something that was put off for a really long time. Why do you think that we didn't give enough emphasis to what consciousness is? Is because we couldn't understand it, or where do you think that came from?
Because it's a subjective experience. It's like how you experience things on a subjective level. And therefore, you can't analyze it by putting it on a scale or by looking at it through a microscope. So it is not accessible to the sensory perspective, sensory level, even if you improve your instruments on the surface level. And so that is why science wanted to be objective, which means to look at objects, to be able to measure them, to be able to put them in a weighing machine, or to examine them through microscopes or telescopes and all of that. And so consciousness being a subjective, very non-material, it is actually absolutely non-physical, non-material entity, science decided that it's not part of the realm of what we can analyze and study. And so, in labs and in even scientific circles, if you were to speak about consciousness, it will be only looked at as metaphysics and philosophy, or, some kind of literature or something, but not something approachable through science. Now, what changed is the realization of the importance of consciousness, because we live our lives through consciousness. And by extending that value, there has been always the enigma. Where does it come from? What is this thing that allows us to see? If we want to take a metaphor or an analogy, say you have a movie, and the movie is in the movie machine, but you don't have a screen. So how can you see the movie without the screen? So when you go to see a movie in a movie theater or whatever, you have a screen and it's flat and it's just there. And then suddenly the projection happens on the screen, and now you can see the movie. So life is like a movie being projected on the screen, which is then the field of consciousness. Because without consciousness, you can't experience any love, any feeling, any meaning to your life. Imagine yourself living your life in coma or living your life in deep anesthesia. Then what does it matter that you are the wealthiest person, the most loved person, the most knowledgeable person? It doesn't matter whatsoever. So the consciousness, therefore, has come to the forefront because it's the most meaningful aspect of our life, particularly that consciousness is not just one thing on that level, one kind of experience. We have different levels of consciousness. We can be drowsy, we can be clear. So these are different shades, different colors of consciousness. And so loving, feeling, expecting, hoping, having pain, having joy, all these are different flavors, different colors of consciousness. So now there is a huge interest in science since maybe only 20 years or so. I mean, there been an interest, but they left it because they thought they cannot really put their hands on it or get a hint of what it is like. But now, since of its realizing its importance, philosophers and sciences have revived the interest in consciousness as something very essential to understand.
I love that you bring up perception, because I want to dive into a kind of a different perspective on consciousness, because I want to know how much of our experience is based on illusion or perception / bias versus actual experience.
In my book, Consciousness is All There Is, which I'm glad it was just recently a New York Times bestseller, I describe that any experience is based on three aspects: the observer, the observed, and the process of observation, which means whatever links the observer to the observed. So when you see an apple, it's not just the object that is important. It's you, the apple, and all that contributes, the light, the environment, the connection to the apple, the feelings that you have with the apple. And then you see the apple. And so you can have a mind that is clear and working in a certain way, and you can see the apple in a certain way, and it leads to certain maybe expectations, maybe feelings, maybe desires, maybe you're hungry, maybe whatever, maybe you remember, oh, the apple reminds me of Adam and Eve or something like that. It depends on your state of mind. Now, if you take some drugs, for example, you might see the apple as an elephant or as a crawling something. If you are in a dream, you can imagine the apple growing or becoming smaller and all of that. So in answer to your question, perception or the subject has a huge input in terms of what we perceive. You can be walking in the street and see something, you think it's a snake, maybe it's just a rope, and you get scared, and your whole life you can rush, you can fall, you can, create havoc, because your perception was examining something and it saw it from a certain angle with a certain background and preparation of your mind, and that led you to a certain conclusion, which might have almost nothing to do with true realities. So experience, which I call bits of consciousness, bit like computer bits, not like a small amount, just the one aspect of experience, is the triple of observer, process, and observed. And this is how reality is actually defined.
There's so much there. There's so much in your work. And when I was going through the ebook of the book, and congratulations on the accomplishment of it already, I know that it's going to impact so many people. There's so much depth to your work. And I find from being a doctor trained at Harvard to MIT for neuroscience and the successor for Transcendental Meditation, you've done so many things. And I'm curious, what were some of the pivotal moments in your early childhood that made you go down this path to begin with?
I was curious, like everybody else, is not specific, curious about life, about where we are, where we're coming from, how we make our decisions. And I thought by studying medicine, I could understand that, because then I thought at that time that the whole physiology is what makes us who we are, and there is almost nothing else. I had some spiritual inkling in terms of understanding, I would call it just the mind, the feelings, the behavior, and all of that. And then I was in a situation where I learned Transcendental Meditation. And around that time, almost just around that time, there was a civil war where different factions, for various religious, political, economic reasons, and various, influences, they started to kill each other. And for me, that was dramatic. And I thought, why people would do that? What is the reason? What's the motivation? Why humans are able to do so much harm to each other, and why can't we live together? And so I started to investigate more about the mind, about consciousness, through practicing Transcendental Meditation, but also through studying the nervous system, studying disease and altered state of consciousness, psychiatry, and then neurology, how the brain, how the chemistry of the brain, how does it influence our perception, our experience in life, and how we come out with making decisions based on prejudice, based on colors of, the glasses we are wearing, how we see things based on our upbringing. And so that led me to a search, and I thought when I finished my academic studies, Harvard and MIT and all of that, I thought I'd take a kind of a sabbatical and study the ancient techniques of meditation and all of that. And I was lucky to be able to work with a great seer, a great knower, a great teacher, Maharishi Mahesh Yogi. And my sabbatical became a lifelong study and research in the field of reality. What is reality? I was open to all possibilities. Maybe reality has two aspects. One is subjective, one is objective, one is spiritual, one is material, and one is physical. But having studied all possibilities and churned them in through philosophy and spirituality and science, I came to a conclusion that really satisfied me fully and answered my questions about the mysteries between quotation mark of life, which is what's the meaning of life? Are we free? Are we determined? And all of these big questions that have not fully yet been answered from a complete perspective. And so that's why I wrote the book, actually, to share my thoughts and, be able to contribute. Hopefully, thinkers, philosophers, and scientists will look at it and see what it has to offer.
How have you been able to find the mutual ideas from science and spirituality? And you've been able to merge them really well, but how have you been able to do so?
Well, it's because science advanced a lot in understanding what physical reality is and where it comes from. And my personal experience and learning with Maharishi Mahesh Yogi and the programs that I've been through and the research that I have done converged into one reality. There cannot be two realities, There cannot be two universes that have two different ultimate reality. If there is an ultimate reality, it must be one. And it has to be convincing on different levels. It has to be convincing on the level of the findings that we have today in science. It has to be convincing in terms of making sense and answering questions. So what I call the explanatory power. Does it explain our life? Does it make sense of why we are here, why there is suffering? How can we be happy? Why there is wisdom? What is wisdom? What is the social contract? What is the meaning of life? How can we handle different situations? So complicated questions, when you start getting answers based on the simplest possible paradigm or the simplest possible hypotheses, then you know you are on the right track. So there is a huge convergence between science and what I would call spirituality, or if you like, consciousness, because spirituality is not something religious, doesn't depend on belief. I mean, religious people can be spiritual, but they can also be dogmatic and radical or whatever. They can be of all kinds, but they can, of course, be spiritual. And even a scientist can be spiritual, which means a scientist who values also things that are not just physical and material. Love is spiritual, compassion, empathy. These are spiritual. These are feelings that are tangible on the level of feeling, but they are not something you weigh in a scale or you look at in a microscope.
Yeah, it's funny. The things that usually matter the most in life are the things that we cannot see, but we give so much emphasis to the material in life.
Yeah, we imagine that it's the material that's going to give us, but it all ends up being, that's why I took the example. What does it matter that you are the most knowledgeable person, even the most loved person, or the wealthiest, whatever you like, the most powerful, if you are in deep anesthesia all the time? It doesn't matter. What matters is how you experience things, how you feel things. You can be the wealthiest person in the world and be the most miserable person in the world. What does it matter? But people have put the emphasis on just the physical, the material, the possessions, and all of that. They can be helpful. Don't misunderstand me. They can be fabulous. I'm not saying you shouldn't have them. But what I'm saying is the importance of how you live them, how you experience them. That is the end product. So people have lost the sense of priority in life, and they go after what a consumer society tells them. If you don't get this, you're not going to be happy. If you don't get this, you're not going to be happy. So you get this and you're still unhappy, or for a little while you feel satisfied, but your life isn't going in a greater fulfillment. You don't feel flourishing. You don't feel growing. You don't feel well necessarily. You might feel for a certain time. So it's all happening on the experience level. That's how we live our life. And that's why I feel, and I think the philosophers and scientists today are coming back to say, okay, there is something important there, because what's the priority in life? Once we have achieved great success on the physical level, now they are saying, well, what is the physical doing to us, and how we handle it, and how we digest it, and how we perceive it? These are also important. So what can we do about that? And that's why you see a great surge in interest in yoga and meditation and mental techniques.
Yeah, what I love about your work is you are trying to answer the big questions and seem to have answered the big questions in life that most people, unfortunately, don't even really ask, funny enough. So you've heard the quote, you are the average of the 5 people you surround yourself most with, right? Well, that's more true than you could possibly imagine. And what if those 5 people were a human lie detector, an FBI negotiator, an ex-CIA spy, a billionaire, and everything in between? Well, that's exactly what I've been able to do with my podcast over these past few years. From starting in my car with no money, no experience, no following, not even a microphone, and now I'm collaborating with some of the most profound individuals in the world. And it's because of two simple things: crafting the perfect pitch so that when the person sees the message, they are open to actually entertaining the opportunity of speaking with you. And number two, finding a way to get that pitch seen to begin with so that you actually can get in that room. And if you want to learn the skills and how I've been able to get the guests that I've been able to get in my show without any kind of audience or experience, the link in the description will be there for Get Your Guest, my course, and how I've been able to collaborate and connect with some profound individuals and show you how you can too. How big of a role do you think that perspective and our own, I guess, unknowings of life when we grew up as a child, like how much of our experience is carved by our childhood, I guess you'd say?
It's like wearing glasses of different colors. We get prepared through certain prejudices, through certain expectations, through certain experiences. When we grow, people tell us, you are good at this, you're not good at that, you are lazy, you are this, you are useless, or you are great, and you are this, whatever they tell us, and whatever we learn from the books, from the elderly, from those who know, that we experience that they know, builds a certain worldview, what I would call a worldview. Let's call it a colored glasses. And now you start seeing things through these colored glasses. And what is important has been also built in these colored glasses. So when you see those things that are supposed to be important, you focus on them, you seek them, and you go for it because you have a certain worldview of what is important in life. And that is how knowledge can help, by guiding us to ask questions about, are we seeing the right things? Are we understanding the right things from the right perspective? What is truth? What is reality? Why we are here? So these questions have to come back. It's not just philosophy which has no implications on daily living, because every one of us has a certain philosophy, whether they know it or not. They have a worldview, and that worldview is their colored glasses. So you show them a white paper, they'll say it's yellow because their glasses is yellow. Now, if they keep saying it's yellow, they're living in what we can call ignorance and lack of understanding of who they are, what the white paper is, and what is going on in between you and the white paper. And so you can say, what does it matter? Well, it matters you are living in ignorance of reality, and or you are struggling with something based on preconceived ideas about who you are and what you are here for and how you can improve and how you can make yourself better and how you can be truly happy. So knowledge has great purifying power. It just cleans your glasses. And the greatest knowledge is to experience truly, directly oneself. That's why we teach a technique called Transcendental Meditation, which allows you to go beyond what you see on the surface and experience within yourself that ultimately you are that ocean of consciousness that we're talking about. And as you dive deep into that reservoir of creativity and intelligence, you can actually come out with great potentiality for creativity and achievement, and therefore fulfillment in life.
Yeah, I definitely want to dive into meditation, but I think what you touched on, I think, is so powerful, because the red tinted glasses is what I was told as well, that approach to life. And it was this awakening for me where I realized that I was seeing through life through my bias that was not to help me in any way. It was really to reconfirm beliefs that I previously had. And I find from a lot of the people that I speak to, the most intelligent people are the ones that are open to letting go of what they previously believed and let go of that preconceived notion. What's something that you believed at the beginning of your career that you no longer believe?
Beautiful. That's a beautiful, necessary openness in order for our world to become harmonious and for us to learn more and learn from places we don't expect we would learn from.
Yeah. When you got started in this was just consciousness in general. I would assume that there was a lot of hesitation from your peers in the approach that you were taking. How have you been able to get other people to kind of get more of an understanding of your approach, and really why, from your first book to your second book even, has there been any changes in the way that you approach kind of teaching this?
It's just also being compassionate in terms of caring for others and how they see things, and trying to refine the logics so that you can answer their questions from a truly understandable perspective, rather than just keeping it too theoretical or too metaphysical or even too scientific. And so it's a question of sharing knowledge, sharing experience, and repeating it again and again, and being patient. So when you search for truth, sometimes you come through obstacles. Just say, take a simple example. When Galileo or Copernicus looked at the movement of the planets and the stars, they decided the Earth is round. It's not that the sun is moving from east to west, but it's the Earth that is round and rotating around its axis, creating that experience of the sun moving from east to west. And they felt, that this is real because they analyzed other planets and how they move. There was the telescope, the first telescope invented at that time. And they were sure about it. And, that had very big negative reactions based on prejudice, on dogma about how the reality is. And that's not curious. That's not unusual. It's okay. What I find almost unbelievable is that it took 300 years from that moment of the realization for actually people to accept that the Earth is not flat, it's round, and that, it's rotating around its axis, and it's not the sun that moves. So what this means is there is an expansion of consciousness. First, you are depending only on your physical perspective, and physical reality. You see the sun move in the sky, and you see the Earth flat, and you see it's not moving. You are 100% sure about that. And yet it contradicts, the logic. So if you expand your consciousness and try to see deeper reality into things, you discover that it's different than what your senses just tell you. And then, came the theories of relativity. The special and the general theories of relativity would tell us that even space and time are relative. They depend on speed. And so they can contract, they can expand. And this is still extremely hard for people to even conceive of, because our senses tell us something and let us feel something which we are so sure about. And yet it's not the case. And so openness and the ability to be persistent on researching something that you feel is not right from a certain perspective, but there is some solution to it which you feel is right. And that's what I've done, because to come back to your question, yes, there was resistance at the beginning, but I see much more openness now. And, since I'm on this path since the 1980s, and in the 90s, I talked about consciousness. It's not that it's some new thing. And at that time, it was very bizarre to say that consciousness is primary and all of that. But nowadays, you see, every week there is an article that talks about consciousness and consciousness being everywhere, and they create new words, cosmopsychism, or panpsychism was there as an idea, but it was vague and misunderstood. And so now there is a great openness and great understanding of the possibilities that consciousness is primary, And I take it even further. It's not that there is primary and there is something else that's secondary, but I say that everything is an expression of a field of consciousness.
Yeah. The misconception that consciousness and awareness are essentially the same thing is what I think a lot of people go through life seeing is consciousness is just, I'm conscious. I'm aware of what is happening right now, but there's a distinction between the two. Do you mind breaking what the difference is?
Yes. Awareness is what you are aware of, what you put your attention on, and doesn't mean that your dynamics of who you are as consciousness goes have necessarily changed. It's a different attention. To take an example, you might be a physicist or a physician. At the same time, you're a parent. At the same time, you can drive cars or maybe fly planes. And, maybe you're an athlete that can play tennis or football or whatever. And you have all of these things that are part of you. When you are performing your, let's say, physician's role, you are a doctor and you are seeing a patient, all the other parts go in the background. So we are saying now that your consciousness is the sum total of who you are able to experience and you are capable of being, and that you're putting your awareness now on your role as a doctor. When you finish your role as a doctor and you want to go home, now you go and drive a car. And now you are a driver. You go to see your family or whatever, your parents or your children. Now you are a relative, a parent or a child of somebody. And your awareness has shifted. You're no more like in the role of a doctor. So awareness is where your attention goes. That's what you are aware of. But it doesn't mean what constitutes you as a whole, which is your consciousness. And parts of it you can recall. So we can say that's why they call the term it's in your subconscious. But, subconscious doesn't mean you've lost it. It's not there. Or unconscious, even it doesn't mean unconscious means it's not part of your reality. It's latent, it's dormant, and it's either accessible or not accessible, but it is there. So it's accessible by your awareness or not accessible by your awareness, yet it is part of who you are. And so when you sleep, for example, you're not aware of anything on the surface, but sleep doesn't mean lack of consciousness. Your body is still functioning. If there is a loud noise, you will wake up. If there is something, that hurts you, if there is pain, you will wake up. That means your body has in its background that state of consciousness. And when there is a need, awareness comes to call upon you maybe to do something. Like wake up. If you have to wake up, if there is a fire, maybe you smell the fire even while you're sleeping, or you feel the heat. That means your body is conscious. It has that possibility of being conscious, even though you're not aware of it until you wake up, and now you put your attention on something. And, on the whole thing is that consciousness as a field has huge possibilities, not only doctor and driver and sun and motor and whatever, but also it's the field of all possibilities. The whole universe is an expression of consciousness. And then the awareness is the ability to experience one aspect of that field of all possibilities or another. And so you might be experiencing something, I might be experiencing something, the cat is experiencing something, the dog is experiencing something. They are very different and different levels of consciousness. The tree is experiencing something, although it's not able to experience like I do. It doesn't have the awareness that I have because it just responds mechanically and it responds automatically. It doesn't have a sense of self. It doesn't have a sense of maybe future and past, or it does, I don't know, but I am assuming it doesn't. And so these are different levels of the dynamics of consciousness, and awareness is how much you're able to detect from that field of consciousness.
Yeah, and there's different states of consciousness, right? And so the state of consciousness that we're at determines what we're going to see in the world. How much of our consciousness do we really have control over?
Ultimately, we can control the whole field of consciousness because we are that. And as human beings, it has been shown that we can go through different layers of consciousness. That's why in the book I describe the different levels of consciousness, all the way from the lower levels, altered states, a coma, vegetative states, somnambulism, different kinds, to the normal states. The normal states are sleep consciousness, dream consciousness, and waking state of consciousness. But in waking state of consciousness, we have broad possibilities of being conscious. You can be under fear circumstances, for example, fight or flight, if you are experiencing a danger moment, and there your consciousness narrows on the specific value. Or you can be in a relaxed state, open state, where your mind opens itself to broad comprehension. Now you think of present, past, future, hopes in life, desire to achieve things, relations, and all of that. That's when your consciousness is not under stress and it expands itself. Now you can expand that consciousness so much so that you can actually experience the entire ocean of consciousness, which is yourself. We often take this example of ocean and waves. You can be on the surface level and experience just a wave. You are just that wave. Or you can dive deep, actually, and experience that you are the ocean, which is what we truly all are. And that is a state of unity. And you grow in consciousness as you expand your awareness and start knowing who you truly are, which is not just the wave, but you truly are the ocean. And then gradually you find that even the others are also the ocean. And that leads to a wonderful state of what we call unity consciousness, where you feel you are unified with everything because you are the ocean. When you put yourself on the level of the ocean, all the waves are yours. Not only that one wave that you used to think it's you, but every wave is yours. You are the ocean.
Yeah, the unity consciousness, cosmic consciousness, there's so many different levels of consciousness, and it seems for so many people we're at a lower level of consciousness going through life, not really thinking about what life really is, asking those big questions that you answer in the book. How much of what we cannot see impacts what we can see?
Yeah, I mean, if you say like how much of our what is called subconscious or unconscious is one level within ourselves, and it really is a huge impact. It's almost like an iceberg where your attention goes on the surface level and you see on the top level the iceberg above the water, and you think, oh, that's the whole thing. And then if you dive deep, you find how huge it is, much more than what you see on the surface. So absolutely, when we make decisions, when we are acting in our life, for what we eat, for what we like, for relationships, for even profession and all of that, we are motivated by the whole reality of who we are, which is our consciousness, but not necessarily our awareness, which means we might not be aware of these values, but they are part of the underlying consciousness that we have. Some people call it subconscious or unconscious values, and they motivate us. It's huge. It influences us a lot. Now, that is for ourselves as an individual, but there is also the environment. There is others which are part of our collective existence, and they influence us also in their behavior, in their presence, in their stress, or in their happiness, in their love, in their care, in their compassion towards us. So all of these things we don't see necessarily, but they motivate us. You know, you meet somebody and they are kind to you, and or whatever, or they inspire you for friendship or for love or for care. So you don't see those aspects, but they change your life. You fall in love, you know, you make a decision to go somewhere, to do something. And, you were not going to take that trip, but now you will want to take the trip because that person is there, or that reality is there, or that opportunity in business, or that opportunity in research or in discovery. And so these are things that are actually influencing us all the time, even though we don't necessarily directly see them or directly experience them and be aware of them on the surface level, but our consciousness detects them. That's why it's a difference between awareness and consciousness. You really, put your finger on it when you ask that question, because all of these things influence each other. We are influenced by the entire universe. Some influences are very minimal, and some influences are more direct and immediate and big. But we are influenced by so many factors that we don't necessarily consciously, on the surface level of awareness, are aware about.
Yeah, it's ironic that for the decisions we make in life, most of the things that drive our decisions are the things we can't see. And when we are going to try to find the answers in life, whatever answers they may be, we look outside of ourselves and look for other people's advice, when usually the best approach is to go inward, right? And this is where I want to lead into meditation here, because it's had such a profound impact on me. How has meditation really created the person that you are, and kind of wanting to get into even more of consciousness and what it really is?
Well, I give it the whole credit for who I am, in a sense, because, of course, there is my study, my research, and all my intellectual work and all that. But it's the experience that gave me the answers, the going deep within and to see clearly. See, I take an example about feelings and intuition and all of that. If you have a little glass of water and you tap it, you can create only barely any ripples in it. But if you take a swimming pool and you tap it, you can create more waves kind of within it. If you have a lake, then you can create much bigger waves. And if you have the ocean, you can create huge waves in the ocean. So the inner depth that we have is going to influence how much we are able on the outside to have great dynamism, great possibilities, great development. See, a tree that has short roots cannot grow very high. So for a high tree, for better nourishment, for power, it has to send its roots very deeply into the field, which allows it to have strength and stability and also get nutrients. And we are the same. If we are projecting ourselves only outside, we become subject to situations and circumstances. Or we can call ourselves, if the situation and circumstances are not helpful, unfortunately, we become like a football that is kicked around by situation and circumstances. My life, your happiness, what you do depends on how things are in the outside. But if you dive deep and anchor yourself in yourself, where you are that ocean, then you have inner strength and stability. And no matter what happens on the outside, you are able to overcome the difficulties, you are able to change the circumstances, and you become a master of your destiny. So you take your life in your hands rather than being kicked around by situations like that. So it has an impact on how much you can do, the depths of your ocean of being, of your consciousness, gives you greater potentiality. And that is an important point, which means it's not just a philosophical understanding about consciousness. It's all about the ability to develop consciousness, that there is a way to actually expand awareness and expand consciousness. So it's not like, okay, I understand what my consciousness is and fine, so what does it do to me? Well, what it does to you is explain to you how you can expand your awareness so you are a master of your destiny, so you live life in its full meaning, and so you are happy and fulfilled, because that's the purpose of growing and flourishing.
There's so much in your work that I find truly just fascinating. And there's a quote from your book that I really loved, that the perceptions we trust are the perceptions we trust most are not fixed and absolute, but relative. And I find, again, like so much of why I got into this was I was so curious about these beliefs and how they carve the way that we go through life and everything in between. What is a perception that you've had to challenge in doing research for this book?
The perception that everything is physical and material, and really the sense that what we see on our sensory level is the end of all that there is, that is reality. And that is a huge thing to overcome when you talk to people and when you explain, consciousness and that thing which is non-physical, non-material. And the problem is with other philosophers or thinkers, not to criticize, but is that they decide either this is real or that is real, which means they say if consciousness is real, the material reality or the physical reality is only an illusion. And so you have many scientists and philosophers who look deep into the problem that I present in the book and we examine. And they decided that it cannot be that the physical reality is the ultimate reality. So the physical, whatever we see, we touch, etc., is non-real. It's an illusion. And that is by itself non-convincing, because we live there. You pinch me, I get pain. It's real. I have a table. I have hopes. All of this is real. And so you can't tell me it's just an illusion and it's kind of a dream and all of that. And the other aspect is to say that consciousness is an illusion. So kind of get rid of the problem by saying that consciousness doesn't exist. But this is ridiculous. I live my life through consciousness. It's the most important thing for me. Without consciousness, what is it worth? Nothing is worth anything. So you can't just kick consciousness out of the door and say, I solved the problem. What I present is a continuity of realism, which means reality of consciousness, and the reality of the appearance of the physical and material level as being absolutely real, but on their own level, not as separate entities from consciousness. So I had to bridge the gap between something non-physical, non-material, which is consciousness, and how it appears as consciousness and becomes real. So therefore, consciousness has all these layers of reality. One is most abstract, which we call pure consciousness, transcendental consciousness, which goes beyond all the surface value. And then you have different layers. You have a mental layer, you have a feeling layer, you have an intellectual layer, and then you start getting physical layers that are part of this continuum of consciousness appearing and being experienced from all these different levels. So that's how we solve the conundrum. And I go through detail about how this can be the case in a logical way, in a sequential way, to explain that all of this is real. The physical is also real on its own level, but the material from which it is made, the substance from which it is made, is a field of something non-physical, non-material. If you want to push it harder, it takes a few steps to explain that, but the book goes in detail through that, and I hope, the readers will find it satisfactory.
Yeah, it is very in-depth. It is one of the books that I think you can't just read it once. You have to read it multiple times to really not just like understand it, but to really live it, right? And I mean,
yeah.
The big questions in the book are questions that for so long we haven't had even an idea of where to start to create the answer. And you've dove so deep into that work. And what do you find from your work is most misunderstood?
Well, first, thank you for your comment. I really appreciate it. It gives me a very nice feeling that many people are loving it, but it's, one more great person like you appreciates it. So thank you. The main misconception is the reality as we discussed, as you beautifully presented, the difference between understanding intellectually something and actually absorbing it, being ready to absorb it. It's like if I tell somebody that space and time are relative, which means the distance between you and me could be either long or short, and the time could be also either stretched or short, depending on how fast you are moving. They might say, I understand it intellectually, but I can't grasp it fully. You know, it's like why it took 300 years for people to accept that the earth is round, because they see it's flat. And so it does take a little bit of going back into it from a feeling level, and using not only the intellect but also the imagination. Imagination is very powerful, and so that's why in the book there are illustrations, there are metaphors, so they can explain or give a hint of how this can be. That there is actual reality is made out of consciousness rather than physical and material in its essence.
Tony, there's so many rabbit holes that we can go down. I know that we're short on time. I want to ask you one last question I ask every guest. My question to you is, what belief are you currently unlearning?
What belief I have in terms of?
In general, just like what belief are you unlearning? What are you working on letting go of? Yeah.
What I had to go through and unlearn is a dogmatic belief that has no full understanding of logics and science and philosophy, but it's based on like mystery and things that exist without them being explainable. So kind of the mystery of life, the mystery of creation, the mystery of where things are from. So this was my beliefs that I had to kind of gradually get over. But right now, I'm trying to see how the future will be and how the collective consciousness will lead to a better world. And sometimes the belief inside that, even if intellectually I know it's not the case, that people are still having time to mature in greater knowledge and wisdom on a collective level, and they still have to fall back to ways of solving problems among themselves, or solving the problems of environment, or solving the problems or the challenges of artificial intelligence, of genetic engineering, on simply a personal profit level with small vision, rather than on a collective level of well-being for now and for the future, for the well-being of all, so that our humanity makes a step towards our next potential step, which is raising consciousness and living a life on earth that is much more beautiful than we have imagined, or that they can imagine. So I'm just trying to convince myself, and I know on the basic level, that if we can change collective consciousness, if we can spread knowledge, if we can talk about the priorities and the highest values in life, that ultimately everyone will come together. But there is still that basic self-defense mechanism, fear of the other, that are going to be challenging. And that's why we need to transcend, we need to raise consciousness. And I hope and I feel that it can be done.
Absolutely. And you're leaving such a massive dent in doing so. Of course, all of your links and everything will be in the show notes below to your book and everything that you have going on. But is there anywhere you'd like to direct people?
I'd love people to read the book. It's available on drnaderbooks.com. It's available on all the different platforms, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Indies, whatever, in different forms. I'd like to hear from you about what you feel about it. And if you share it, it's not just for me to sell a book or to make it important, but it's in my heart is to share a thought that can make a difference, because it has knowledge, and it's also guides towards actual techniques and means to raise life from suffering and pain and problem to health and wholeness and feeling well for the individual, and peace and harmony in society.
Dr. Nader, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me today.
Thanks you, James. It's wonderful to be with you.